Okay, and I think we're
Hi.
live. Hi
Yeah.
guys,
Hello, everybody.
welcome to the second session of the book reading club with Antonio Goncalves, where we're gonna talk about his book Beginning Java E7. Before we start, I'll please ask Antonio to introduce himself, even though he's a very known guy and all people know him, but still we like to know things about Antonio.
So my name is Antonio. I'm Portuguese, live in France, studied in the UK, did a master in Spain, and my research degree in Brazil. And so that was a bit of me traveling around. Other than that, I've been working with Java for 20 odd years, even if the language is only 20. And I've written a Java EE5 book, a Java EE6 book, and a Java EE7 book. And today is the second part of the second chapters of my books. Anyway.
Yeah, that's a lot of books. So actually, today, what we're going to discuss, Ivan?
Yeah, today we are going to discuss the Enterprise Java Beans part of Java EE and the services that are around Enterprise Java Beans. So it's session beans, message-driven beans, JMS, some asynchronous timer service, and stuff like that that is connected with EJBs.
Awesome. Can we introduce the rest of the panel here?
Sure.
Ivan, you can start.
Yeah, okay,
you can start.
My name is Ivan Ivanov. I work for SAP. I am also one of the leads of the Bulgarian Java user group. And I'm also open source fan and contributor. I'm mostly contributing to JBoss Forge. Go on.
Cool. And we have the pleasure to have Mr. Simon with us as well.
Yes, thank you. I'm here for two reasons. Obviously, Java EE rocks, and secondly, I'm technical support behind the virtual jug for when things go wrong, like when I send the wrong link out to people and expect people to join the book club correctly. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, Simon is the man to sort things out of.
Yeah, there's a phrase we use here, which is pissing out your own fires sometimes, where you feel like the hero because you fix problems, but they're actually problems that you also create. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and myself, I'm Roberto Cortez. I work for a company named Tommy Tribe, which supports an awesome application server called Tommy. Have a look if you like it. So we actually going to give it Java E7 support in the future, probably this year. Other than that, I do go around conferences and speak with people around Java EE, so I'm very excited to have these sessions because I really love the Java EE technology. So to kick things out, Ivan, do you want to ask your first question?
Yeah, I can do, but our viewers I want to encourage our viewers to ask their questions in the chat of the virtual jug or in the IRC channel or as a comments in our meetup event.
Yeah, so if you want to join the IRC channel, you can go to virtualjug.com and you're going to see an option there to join an IRC channel. Just pick a nick, join us, and you can ask any question you want on the Virtual Jug channel, and I'll happily relay it here to Antonio so we can discuss the topic and answer your question.
Yeah, that you can participate as well in our small meeting here.
I'm currently on IRC, so I'm checking that out.
Thanks, Roberto.
Okay, go ahead then.
We don't have questions yet in the meetup. No, I checked it.
We don't have them yet. You can go.
Mm-hmm. So let's start with EJB, and one of the big things that I think it was Java EE5 that added to the EJB was the embedded container, the embedded EJB container. And nowadays the container technology spread a lot, not only to Docker but also to whole application servers. So we see some containers like Wildfly Swarm or Payara Micro, or outside of the Java world, we have Spring Boot. And this container thing with application servers that was started by EJB a few years ago, is it just a hype and means to get your talk accepted at a conference, or you see a real world application today or in the future of this approach to running the application server?
Well, the EJB container API is completely useless. It does half. It's really useless, unfortunately. I was part of the Java EE 5 expert group, and at the time when this API was created, there was a bit of hype, and we thought it was the, finally the glory of embedding Java EE, testing Java EE inside the container, and so on and so forth. Let me give you an example. In Java EE 7 now, we have the transactional annotation, which is part of JTA. The EJB add stateless annotation is part of the EJB. Everybody knows that an stateless EJB is transactional. So this spec tells you when you use add stateless, please do not add transactional. Good, makes sense. And then you go, why do I need stateless in this use case? I don't. So you take the stateless out and put a transactional in, which is exactly the same thing. It doesn't run on the EJB container anymore. The EJB container, even in EE7, doesn't know to handle that. And there's plenty of other things that the EJB container doesn't know, can't handle. So that's a bit of a problem. The EJB container API is interesting for little use cases and testing, but
yeah, actually, my question went to these whole application servers that are running as containers, like Wi-Fi, Swarm, or Payara Micro, for example. Do you see a future in this kind of technology where you put the whole thing, the whole server in the container?
Well, that was the idea of the EJB container API, but unfortunately, it didn't work and wasn't updated for EE7, and the whole thing is broken. So one of the first emails actually I sent to the EE7 expert group when it started 18 months ago, I think, was I think the industry is mature enough. Glassfish has been doing, modules, and WebSphere relies heavily on OSGI. There's an API to bootstrap the container. JBoss does the same thing. So Tommy does the same thing. So most of the app servers historically had proprietary APIs to start up a container and do bits and pieces. Plus, with this EJB container API, we really thought it was the beginning of a standardization thing. It will not happen with EE8, maybe with EE9. But one thing is sure is, editors have been doing that for long. And it's been more than a year that everybody talks about microservices. And all the editors were able to do that. Most of the editors were able to do that years ago. And I think now they're all pushing that. They have been able to do that for years, Wildfly 8, since Wildfly 8, even JBoss 6 or 7, I don't know, how was it called before 8, but it's very modular. So you can just take bits of modules, and there was an API, proprietary API to bootstrap the container. So they were all doing that, and with the hype, and with Spring Boot leading, I think they're all pushing that. I love Wildfly Swarm. It's very nice. It's Wildfly underneath, and you just pick up the modules, put your code inside, package that into an executable jar, and you just go Java jar and Bing. So it is, they've all been doing that for years, and now they're actually promoting it, and they most of the editors are jumping into that, and it's not just a trend. I've I'm actually working at the moment with a very simple use case. We need a microservice. We use JBoss, and there was this guy who created a microservice with a Spring Boot, and we didn't really know. It was there up and running, and we didn't look inside the code. And then the team had to look into the code and said, oh, but it's Spring Boot. It's not. Couldn't we have used Wildfly Swarm? Because the production environment knows JBoss. They know how to administer JBoss. Why didn't we use Wildfly Swarm instead of Spring Boot? Answer number one was, we don't give a toss, and it makes sense. At the end of the day, it makes sense. When you have an app server and you want to administer it, you want your production guys to use all the click commands and customize it and open this and disable that and put a data source and administer this and that. This is just a piece of code listening on a port. And then the second question was, oh, okay, but so Spring Boot, but is it Jetty or Tomcat? And the answer was the same. We don't give a toss. And, I started to scratch my head going, yeah, I think, there's this time. We come from decades of the production runs on WebSphere 8.2. And now, oh my God, we're migrating to 8.3. And we've been studying to migrate the WebSphere into JBoss, but we're going to need 2 years of migration just to be sure. And now there's actually simple use cases where people go, I don't know, just a bit of code listening on a port, and I quite find it, interesting. I'm really an app server guy, but this guy I was working with opened my eyes, and at the end of the day, you just go, don't care. Oh, but is Undertow more scalable than Jetty? And the answer is, I don't care. If you need more, just put more. And I was, coming from my background, it was a bit of a shock, but I thought makes sense. So I think it's more than a trend, and we're going to see more and more of that. And actually, it was a very big monolith application running on JBoss, administered with JBoss clusters, and we just had this little service, on the backside, and there are, actually more use cases like that. So I'm not saying one will die and the other one will rise. I think both will work together, and there's a similarity also with the Spring world, where you take a Jetty or Tomcat and you put a very fat war inside that, huge war. And the production guys don't ask you what's inside the war. Is it JPA 2.0 or 2.1? And now we have this service running, and the production doesn't ask if it's a Jetty, a Tomcat, or Undertow. It's quite interesting.
So do you see that in the future you might be able to get some kind of applications, like developing all kinds of crazy stuff? You might even have like an application running, like one in JBoss, another one in Tommy, another one in Spring, all collaborating together and to like assemble this big fat application, at least on the user's view, not on the architectural view.
Bob, the last week I was reading a very interesting blog about microservices, and at the end of the day, it's the new trend of SOA. Remember that the S is service and the O is oriented, which makes sense. So we're just doing, what we've been doing. Now we call that micro. I know plenty of use cases at my customers where micro will never work, so for complex scenarios, actually this same customer, its main application, it's running Swing, because it runs on tactile environments in, industries, etc. There's dust, it's a constrained environment. So they have a swing application running on a thick tactile screen. The business is very complex. It has to be embedded. The guys carry this tablet around and it can break. It has to synchronize offline, etc., etc. So there's plenty of use cases where, this is not possible. I just, unfortunately, I think we live in a hype world. So there's a lot of hype. But I would say, IT should just be about tools and use the right tool for the right job. Fortunately, I haven't worked in a place where everybody wants to use microservices all the time, but I'm thankful enough to have crossed this project where there's bits and pieces and people think reasonably. So I'm not saying, why I can't see one or the other. It's one and the other. Plus, that was SOA was about 12 years ago.
Yeah, cool. So you're thinking that these microservices trend is something that's going to stay for a long time? It's not something that's going to go away, at least.
Well, I still come across SOAP and SOAP messages and envelopes. It has been around for more than 10 years, so I'm sure that in 10 years, when I come here for my Java EE 10 book, the microservices, people will have found something else and will tell you, oh yeah, I think I have some microservices still running somewhere. What a mess.
Yeah, and we hope that you get into a Java EE 10 book and we'll happily review it again. Probably a little bit older, all of us, but so we have a question here from our IRC channel. This is from Pranav, and he's asking if AJB has a future.
Oh God.
That doesn't seem
has a future.
That doesn't seem right.
No. No, it has no future. It's a fantastic spec. It was created nearly 20 years ago. Imagine one piece of code with dozens of services. That was nearly 20 years ago. Since EJB3, it's even better. You just write one class, no interface, and you have all these services. It's a fantastic spec. But we were just talking about microservices. One thing that is sure, that with the embedded world, with the IoT world, with things. I used to work for BA a long time ago, and the clustering environment was, here is a cluster of web servers. Now it's going to talk RMI with a cluster of stateless EJBs. Now it's going to talk with a cluster of entity beans. This is over. People would take a piece of code, embed it somewhere, and multiply that. Instead of saying, here are my servlets and here are my stateless bin, you just go back, here is everything talking, changing with HTTP and so on. So if we go that way, we need a little bit of this here and a little bit of that there. The EJB is too big. It's against what we need. We can't put an EJB on a phone because there's too many services around this EJB. So the EJB spec itself has no future. The services of the EJBs are tremendous, and they will go back to where they belong. I always give the same example, but EJBs were transactional. The Java J2EE 1.2 that was created in '99 had JTA and EJB plus bits and pieces. EJBs have been transactional since day one, and because JTA is a very complicated spec, EJB was there to help us. You know, very easy to do a commit with the EJB. We had to wait, 15 years for this simplicity to go back into JTA. It just doesn't make sense today to have all these fantastic services in the EJB spec. All these fantastic services should go where they belong. And the future of the EJB spec in many, many years will be 10 pages long, and it will tell you at stateless, it's just an aggregation of this service, and that service. At stateful is an aggregation of this service, this one, and this one. And guess what? These services, if you want to know more, go to where they belong. So if you want to know how our transaction works, go to JTA, not me. If you want to know how an asynchronous call works, go to Java EE, the concurrency, not me. So the EJB spec as it is has no future, but it will take a long time to kill it.
Okay, and talking about services that are on EJB.
Oh, excuse me. Let me just interrupt you for a while. I have here a special guest. Let me ask him if he wants to say hi. Yeah, just say hi here. Say hi to our viewers. He actually live.
Oh, David!
Hello, people. How are you?
Good.
We just killed EJB and David Blevins disappeared.
Yeah. I mean, we're deprecating it.
Well, I was saying the same old thing that you know because you are part of the expert group. The EJB is a fantastic spec, but we should put all the services back to where they belong and move on, but slowly.
Yeah, it'll take time. How are you guys doing? Is this like a live hangout?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Welcome, world. Awesome. Well, I'm going to be very late.
Yeah. we cannot take David's time. It's very precious. Yeah, so.
Well, no, that's not. I mean.
Yeah, no, just joking.
More in trouble, more easily in trouble.
Anyway,
I'll talk to you guys later.
Anyway, thanks for joining us for like 10 seconds.
So that was David Bliven, among several things. He's also part of the Java EE and EJB expert group, and he's one of the implementers of a EJB container, actually.
Yeah, he's also my boss. And I have to thank him because he gives me time to do these kind of cool things, like the book reading club.
Okay, so can I continue my question?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you because,
sure.
I wanted to take this chance. Anyway, go on.
Okay, so talking about services around EJB, one of the services is concurrency. So you may specify on EJB whether it should be can be executed, or actually it's isolated in a way. So there was a recent discussion in the CDI mailing list. You're a part of the expert group, so you are following that mailing list, I guess, about adding container managed concurrency to CDI. Maybe not in the spec directly, but in a way. So what do you think about this thing, gradually moving the services that are inherent to EJB to somehow to extensions, and in particular about the concurrency thing?
No, if we move things out of the EJB is not to put them in the CDI spec.
No, not in the CDI spec.
But so the idea was to go to the Java EE concurrency spec, implement the asynchronicity using a CDI extension. But that's a lot of things. Unfortunately, again, there's few chances that it will be in Java EE 8, which is a bit of a drama, but again, this service is fantastic. You just take a method, write at asynchronous, and it works. It can even return a future, and the container can handle that, and it's fantastic. But it only works for EJBs. It has been defined in the EJB spec. It doesn't make sense. It should go like the transactional. went back to JTA. This should go back to Java EE concurrency. And of course, we are trying to push the CDI as an integration platform. The transactional is actually a CDI interceptor. The transactional scoped is actually a CDI scope. This is in the JTA spec. So it's a nice way to integrate because it uses sort of CDI API, which the container knows. So it's very portable. We would like to do the same thing with asynchronous. Put it back to the Java EE concurrency spec and implement it with the CDI API. But we need to first do something on the Java EE, on the EJB spec. Of course, it's not to prune the asynchronous on the EJB spec, but at least say if you have at asynchronous, annotation on your method coming from the EJB spec, you can't mix and match it with the CDI version of it. So the problem when you want to move something out of one spec and put it somewhere else is you need to update both specs. And at the moment, the EJB spec is not moving, and the Java EE concurrency spec, there's not even a maintenance released on the, for Java EE 8. Things might change, but unfortunately, this is the way it is at the moment.
Okay, and when talking about pruning, there's all the containers should now support EJB full if they don't implement only the web profile, of course, but they have to support EJB full as well as EJB Lite. EJB full, in my opinion, contains some really legacy technologies, legacy specs, or not specs, but actually parts of the spec. So do you see any SUI removing the support of EJB full in favor of EJB Lite?
It might happen because there's two important things in EJB full. Well, important things. Important for some. The entity beans, it's not important, so that's gone. The message-driven beans. Message-driven beans are in the EJB full. But JMS 2.1, the one arriving in Java EE 8, is trying to integrate more CDI into the spec. So hopefully from Java EE 8 onwards, you will say, oh, this is a class, I put message listener, or I don't know how it will be called, and it works out of the box, and you don't need an MDB. So if this is the case, if we can say we can change MDBs and now use CDI message listeners, that will be one side of it. The other thing that is in full is the remote EJBs. And we are pruning CORBA. So we are pruning CORBA in Java EE 8. That means it will disappear from Java EE 9. So if we prune CORBA, remote EJBs are RMI on IEOP, maybe we will also go, okay, that's the end of remote EJBs. So if we get rid of CORBA and remote EJBs, and if we have a nice translation from JMS2 to any bin listeners, yeah, hopefully it will be the end of EJB full.
Okay, after killing so much of the EJB, what will be the answer for the future? Will be just plain CDI beans with the service that you actually need?
Yeah, not even CDI bean. There's this very philosophical quest in Java EE. There's actually a bit of a spec called a managed bean. So a CDI bean, again, is extra services. A managed bin is really the bare minimum of a manageable unit in Java EE. And life in Java EE should be like that. You know, everything is managed. So everything is a managed bin. And on this bin, you add web servlet. So this managed bin becomes a servlet. On this bin, on this managed bin, you add application scope. So it becomes a CDI bin. And on this bin, you add transactional, and it becomes a transactional bin. So this is, you know, hopefully the bright future of Java EE is just manage bins with a pack of the services you need. But again, it's a bit, you know, we are a bit far from that. On the right path, but still a bit far.
Do you recommend for developers at the moment that are developing their new apps to have any kind of good practice to, like, okay, so they might be thinking, okay, AJB is going to be dead, so I might not want to use AJB. So they might even not want to use Java EE at all, since things are not exactly ready for other specs. So what will you recommend for someone that's starting right now? How should they do things?
Move to Scala. That was a joke.
Well, if you live in like a cold country, that's cool because it will warm you up your CPU.
You know, in the code I see, EJBs are mostly used for transactional purpose. So just use Java EE7, take any bin and just go at transactional. If you need something more, then, you know, but a singleton, an EJB, a singleton, if you just use that, use a CDI application scope. And if you want this singleton to be transactional, then put a transactional on your application scope. There's only some services that you need to move to the EJB spec. You know, like the pooling. But again, you know, pooling nowadays, it's not like it used to be. Plus, the spec doesn't say much about pooling. You know, the spec tells you that a stateless bin should be pooled. Yes. Do we have an API to control that? No. Do we have an annotation to say this one should be pooled and this one no? So even the pooling today, sometimes not really needed. The stateful, just use a CDI bin with a conversational scope or a session scope. The remote, yes, you need EJB. Asynchronous, yes, you need EJB, except if you are on a servlet model. Servlet has a completely different asynchronous model than EJB. Same for REST services. So asynchronous, if you need that, yes, it's an EJB. A scheduler, unfortunately, the scheduler is the same problem. It's a fantastic piece of spec inside the EJB, very easy, very neat, but only works for EJBs. So we had the same idea. We went back to all the spec leads and said, look at this add schedule. Fantastic. Put it back to where it belongs. Put it back to Java EE concurrency and implement it as a CDI interceptor. So there's only 4 or 5 services in Java EE7 that you really need to move to the EJB. So I would say the EJBs are not dead yet. With Archelion, you can easily test it now. But yeah, I would, when 80% of your business tier is transactional, just use a bin and put a add transactional into it. You don't have to bother with the stateless bin. But again, I know there's plenty of benchmarks. If you take a bin and put add transactional, or if you take an EJB, put add stateless, you know the add stateless is full of new extra services. It does not have an performance impact. So I'm not saying don't use EJBs because they perform not well, or the contrary, because actually in most of the benchmarks, EJBs come first in terms of performance. I'm just saying in readability, if really what you need is one service, write it down. This is a transactional bin, and when you read the code, it makes sense. So yeah, move out of the EJB when you can, and if you can't, it's not a big deal.
Okay.
So
cool.
when you say, yeah, are there any questions or?
Yeah, we have one.
Okay, go on.
We have a couple. So this is from Pranav. He's asking why the JPA spec is not catering web services transactions.
The JPA or JTA?
JTA, Java Transactional API.
Well, the JTA spec is a funny beast. It was created in 99, 1.0, updated in 2001, 1.1, and that was the end of it. We managed
Wow,
to
you know all of those things in memory. That's awesome.
We managed to update it in 1.2 for the @transactional annotation and @transactional scoped, but that was it. JTA is a spec, where we know how to do transaction with transaction managers. We've been doing that for half a century. The API is very, very low level. It does this purpose and this purpose only. I don't see it moving in another realm. I might be wrong, but plus we live a world where a lot of people tell you that you don't need transaction, which is true in a few use cases. So I think the transactions are also getting less and less used. They are still used in 90% of the case, but we come from a world where it was 100%. The first architectures I was doing with BEA and WebLogic was XA transaction. Two-phase commit was the thing to do 15 years ago if you were a real man. I haven't seen XA transaction for quite a while, I would say 4 or 5 years. And now I see more and more no transactions at all. So I'm not sure it will be updated to suit this kind of use cases.
Okay, Roberto, the other question?
Wait, yeah, actually, let me. Apparently, yeah, it was referring to the web services transaction spec.
I think we are discussing web services, both JAX-RS and JAX-WS. The next.
Yeah, well, people do the questions anyway.
Yeah, right.
But even though we have here, let me see, another question about well, not exactly the topics we're discussing, but I also like to tell this to Antonio. So let me see if I can spell this correctly. Guara Brills. He says he's a Spring guy, but he read your book and he really likes your book, Antonio. So
I'm gonna write a book on Spring.
Yeah, he just said he went through JPA and CDI sections and he really likes them. Anyway, his question is not really related with the topics from today, but let's go through since he's asking it. In the REST spec, he's looking for additional supports in the future. So basically, he wants to know if it's going to have hypermedia support like Spring Data does, or Spring Data REST does.
I don't know Spring Data REST. I've used Spring Data and I really liked it. The good thing with CDI and CDI extensions is you actually have CDI data. So you have the same mechanism of Spring Data developed with the CDI extension, then portable, same idea, interface, query, etc., etc. So I don't know the Spring Data REST, but you know, again, the CDI spec is a fantastic, underused spec, but it's a fantastic spec because you can create so many extensions that are portable through app servers to app servers. And I would like to see actually kind of a Spring Data or CDI data into JPA. I would like to see because I find it quite neat. Plus, you know, remember that the Java EE is not there to make innovation. So the Spring Data has been around for many years. It works great. We know how it works. CDI data, same thing. The concepts are the same, and I would like actually to have that back in the JPA spec. I haven't seen any emails about that, but well.
Yeah, let's see what happens then. Sorry, you want to interrupt you a while ago. Can you please
Sure.
go ahead?
Our viewers are with higher priority than me. Okay, so talking about the services around EJB, another one of them is authorization. And now there's a special JSR for security stuff around Java EE. It's, if I'm not wrong, JSR 375, where David Blevins is also part of the expert group, by the way. So do you follow that JSR, Antonio, and do you know what can we expect from that in the next Java EE release?
Well, the JS, no, I'm not part of the expert group, and I haven't. I've registered in the mailing list, so I read things once in a while. I've actually went to a couple of talks from the spec lead, and again, you know, Java EE since its birth, it's seen as a very secure platform, etc., etc. But security in Java EE is a bit of a drag because the specs and the APIs that standardize security, authorization, and authentication in Java EE are very low level, very low level. JASPIC is a very funny beast. So the new spec, and again, used in EJBs, it's one of the services. Authorization is quite easy in EJBs, but other than that, it's a bit of a mess. So yeah, this spec is very promising because again, it's things that we've been doing for decades, so we know how to do them. It's the right time to standardize them. Well, we should have done that, you know, a spec ago, but you know, anyway. And the spec lead is quite a CDI enthusiast, so there's a lot of CDI, you know, integration. And again, you don't have to hook into the EJB model. You just take a bean and you say, I authorize this method to role admin. And this is only doable today on EJB. This would be a very good step further into the security model of Java EE, and you know, again, extracting one service from the EJB spec. So it's promising for what I've read and seen. It's quite nice.
Okay, cool. Should I ask again, Roberto?
Yeah, you can go on.
Okay, thank you. So on the messaging thing, I have a few questions here. The message-driven beans, they are something like the message consumers, the asynchronous message consumers that you should write by hand. So when would you write a message-driven bean, and when would you write a message consumer manually?
It's, you know, it's the same idea. If you are inside the container, the container is there to help. So one annotation and it works out of the box. If you are outside the container, then you don't have the choice. I think you know it's unfortunate that we come from a history of heavy, monolithic, expensive, not scalable, blah 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 blah. Because at the end of the day, a container is there to help. You know, think of your JVM. You know, I've started IT doing C++. You know, the JVM is a fantastic container that helps me a lot. The Java EE container is the same. Unfortunately, it has been seen like a huge beast that takes all the CPUs and all the RAM of your pool laptop, but it shouldn't. So a container is there to help. And take the message-driven bin. It's fantastic. You just put one annotation, and you know everything is done. When I was working for BA, you know, I used to work. I worked a little bit on the JTA integration. God, it's so difficult. And JMS is, you know, it's the same thing. Doing transaction in JMS is really difficult. It's really low-level things. And you have this container, you go at message-driven, works. Fantastic. So if you are inside the container, use as many services as the container can give you. If you are outside the container, well, do it by hand. That's also where Spring comes from. If you look at the JDBC template, it's not called a container, but it's there to help you because these are complex topics. You know, writing a MOM, writing a transaction manager, writing all these things are very, very complex. So if you can have a bit of syntactic sugar and all the magic happens, good.
Okay, so you said that if we are living inside a container, always use message-driven bin in favor of writing the message consumer, the synchronous message consumer by ourselves.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Do you have any techniques to test those message-driven beans? I mean, I come across with some teams that they have like some hard time to test them.
Message-driven bin, it's the piece of Java EE that is really not easy to test. You know, again, only with Archillion you can, with Archillion and a bit of magic, you know, a bit of plumbing, you can do that. Messaging is not really easy to test. You can, with Archillion, you can send a message, but then to make sure the MDB has received the message, it's really not easy. And you know, one technique is to put an interceptor around the MDB. But again, if there's a problem in the interceptor, or the interceptor says yes, I've received the message, but the MDB never receives it. So it's, yeah, I don't have an answer for that. I don't have an easy answer to this is the way you test the MDB.
Actually, I read it on the book from Aslak and Andrew Rubinger about continuous enterprise development. So, you know, Archillion is there to avoid mocking, but actually in this book, one of the only, I think it was the only chapter that was talking about mocking was exactly the messaging part, because they were mocking the message queue.
Like, you have a few brokers that you can use in memory, so like a database. So it's, you know, 10 years ago we were not testing with databases because they were heavy things. Now everybody tests with in-memory databases. You know, it's very common that people talk about unit testing, and you see H2 in the middle, or HSQL. So it looks like we've come a point where in-memory database are so cheap. Let's put them in unit testing. And actually, in-memory MOMs also, I remember with ActiveMQ years ago, that's what we were doing. And it's not that heavy, anymore.
Okay, I think we should wrap it up.
Yeah, we're running out of time, and we need to have Antonio go. Do you want to make like a final question, Ivan, or are you done?
Yeah, I have some more questions, but okay.
Oh, one. Let's go for one more.
Just one more.
Okay. Okay, so it will be a short one. Is there a use case for consuming JMS messages synchronously? Because you can consume them asynchronously or synchronously. Is there a use case for synchronous consumption?
God, no. One of the beauty of JMS is, it's also asynchrony. It's not just asynchrony, of course. Sending messages, storing messages in database if needed, sending to external services, external systems, legacy, publish, subscribe. But asynchrony is, it's not part of the spec because, as you say, you can read a message synchronously. But I've never seen such a use case.
Yeah, me neither. So I was wondering when would anyone use that? Okay, so
we are done with our time. I would like to thank Antonio once again to join us. Thank you so much
for inviting me, guys.
Yeah, and also Ivan for coming up with these awesome questions, and of course all the audience that saw us live. And
thank you to Roberto for waking up so early.
Oh, well, that's fine. Anyway, this session is going to be available on the virtualjug.com website. You can also watch it later on YouTube. We're going to make a third and final session. Let me see. I have the date right here. Oh, 17 March, using the same schedule. So, be there to join us. I'll send a meetup invite in a few days. And thank you so much, guys, and see you next time.
Yeah, just to give a heads up, the rest of the chapters are about JSF, Java Server Faces, the Facelets technology, JAX-RS, JAX-WS. So
yeah, that's a lot of stuff.
I'm sure I'll have plenty of questions about JSF.
I guess you're not going to have anyone from me.
I guess I'll have one question about JSF coming again and again and again and again.
Okay, let's see how that goes. Anyway, thank you again for watching, and see you next time, guys.
Thank you very much.
Bye.